But remember, we're not faced with simply accounting for a decrease in biodiversity. We have to account for the increase and the anti-anthropic development, which, as we said before, governs the entire system. In fact, as we discussed before in the last couple of sessions, the destruction of various species, of systems of species, is not because of something they do wrong. It's because of their failure to follow the overall anti-anthropic development. So whatever we see happening on this galactic scale has to be governed by the exact same type of anti-anthropic development as we see in the biospheric scale. Now, all this is, again, so you start to see you've got processes that are much, much larger. Now, I'll just give a hint here. Once you start to look at, there's been increasing evidence over just the last couple of decades that what we're observing is, on even the galactic scale, is something that's a tiny picture of something that's much broader. Because if you take a look at by observing the redshift, looking at the distance of various galaxies. Now, again, we've discussed in a report on this site, a very important one that people should take a look at, that there are serious problems with the standard interpretation of redshift. But what you can look at in looking at these various groupings that you see outside of our galaxy, groupings of galaxies, you can start to see that you do get an organization among other galaxies. And ours also has the same thing, where the galaxies will relate to one another in the form of what are called galaxy clusters and other structures. We've got a nice sort of recreated image here from NASA of some of what you're looking at. But so each of these little bright areas, these are clusters of galaxies. You can see that on the large, they form these tendrils, massive, massive superstructures. One of the largest, the Great Wall, forgetting the order of the scale, something like tens of thousands of light years in length, a couple of massive structures in those Great Walls. That one might even be longer, but it's obscured by the center of our Milky Way galaxy. We can't actually see the far end of it. But as you look out there, you see this huge structure of galaxies that are related to one another. And you start to realize that you're looking at a system of systems of the sort that we're observing here in our galaxy related to living processes. Looking at something much larger. A number of other things start to give you evidence in that direction too. There's been a recent discovery, I don't know if I have an image here of it, but a recent discovery of, if you take a look at and this is something that was actually came up in discussion with Vernadsky very early on. A couple of people have brought this up as a potentiality. Vernadsky, around the exact same time, Kurt Gödel, in discussions with Einstein, brought up the possibility that there might be some greater significance to the spiral structures of galaxies on the large scale. And that there might, in fact, be if you were to start to examine the predominance of one-handed spiral over another-handed spiral, you might see structures and organizational structures in that on the large. Now, in the last 2 years, it's been shown observationally that's true. Now, this has thrown everybody with the simple Big Bang models and other things into a total tizzy because they don't quite know what to make of it, and everybody is rapidly trying to come up with theories for it. But what's interesting for us is that there does seem to be a definite preferred axis in the nighttime sky, which is such that when you're looking at a certain angle in our northern hemisphere, you see a predominance of right-handed spirals. Not exclusively right-handed spirals, but a predominance of one right-handed spiral along a given axis. In our southern hemisphere, looking down the other way, you see a predominance of left-handed spirals. So again, it's as though you suddenly get this glimpse of this massive superstructure that we're standing within here on the surface of our planet. Now, again, I want to pose that just as a hint of what the larger scale structure is that's governing these processes here. Now, that's significant for a number of reasons. One, because, well, the most significant, which again we touched on this report, our planetary defense report that we put out from the basement a little while ago, is that if you want to look at the most important phenomena here on Earth, you get the argument, well, shouldn't we deal with our problems here on Earth? You've seen over the last year, we've dealt with extremely severe meteorological phenomena, and then severe phenomena of the biosphere of the sort that you would imagine would characterize these major extinction events. We've seen many of this last year, an increase in earthquakes, tornadoes, volcanic activity. They referred to 2011 as a year of extreme weather. That if you want to understand what's causing that, the scale of your study and your activity has to be, at the very least, the scale of our galaxy. And as we're seeing here, just a hint, understanding what's happening in our galaxy. So to understand what happens on Earth, you have to understand at the very least what's happening in our galaxy. To understand what's occurring in our galaxy, you've got to understand at the very least what's happening on these large-scale supergalactic structures.
One thing I would do in sort of summation on this thing to call to your attention, the first thing is look at that curvature of the closed animal systems which you see on the screen here. That this indicates that there is no such thing as a fixed system in this universe. Systems that are of a fixed nature are going to die. They're going to be eliminated. And that's intrinsic is what we know of Earth. It's intrinsic in what we know of our solar system, our galaxy right now, in which we can attribute by other phenomena which have been referred to in part here, which indicate what the nature of the universe is. There is a bias in the universe which is anti-entropic, underlying. Any process that fails to meet that minimal standard is doomed, is worthy of extinction, and we'll probably soon find it, depending on what your clock is for this reference. At the same time, we have, in terms of human creativity, which is the thing for much human behavior. Much human behavior, as a matter of fact, increasingly, since Kennedy was assassinated, there has been a net trend of decline in the rate of productivity in the human species, especially in the transatlantic region. We have been in a period of disintegration. We are headed toward doom. For example, if the anti-growth policy is introduced by the British Queen, for example, that the environmentalist movement insists by its practice on the extinction of mankind. There's no such thing as zero growth. Without positive growth, all systems in this universe die and are put in the junk heap and consumed as raw material for the past. But that's not the only problem. The question is also the rate of productivity. Now, take mankind. As I said, most people today are intrinsically entropic in their behavior relative to, say, what the United States was in terms of, Kennedy was still alive, which is a standard of measurement. The creativity factor, which must be there in human society, otherwise it goes extinct. It must go extinct. It's of varying degrees. There's a spread, for example, throughout the world, from places of high concentration of technology to areas of lower concentration, or even negative things. We have actually negative cultures today. For example, Europe has become a negative culture. The United States, in a large degree, has become a negative culture. Here we are, we have a thermonuclear bomb capability which can almost extinguish the surface of this universe. And the U.S. Navy has charge of most of it. And they're ready to use it if we get rid of this president. Or don't get rid of this president. And that can do that to us that way. But there's another area here. We can distinguish between non-creativity or anti-creativity, which is the characteristic of the environmentalist movement. The environmentalist movement is the greatest threat to the extinction for the greatest threat of man's extinction. If we don't eliminate the environmentalist movement, mankind is going to go rapidly extinct, and you will be very unpleasantly surprised to find out how fast that extinction will proceed. But on the other hand, you have a certain amount of creativity which was maintained, say, under Franklin Roosevelt, and to some degree in the period after that, and under President Kennedy. There was we saw that in the space program. It was the Kennedy Initiative which was used by Kennedy to launch the space program, which actually raised the level of creativity of mankind in the United States and elsewhere, generally. So there was a baseline of creativity. But in the population generally, the level of creativity has dropped. The people are becoming more and more bestial in the sense of their lack of creativity. You have a certain minimal amount of creativity going on in some cases, but it's not sufficient even to maintain equilibrium per capita on this planet. So the problem I'm addressing is specifically is not only is creativity, as we've discussed it here on the table, is it not an urgent matter for humanity? All policy, all political policy of sane nations is going to be based on consideration of the principle of creativity. That's anti-entropic creativity. And we are far behind that now. We're on the road to doom if we don't reverse it. Mm-hmm. But it's another factor. Where's the source of creativity? Well, the source of creativity of the type we need is radiated by mankind. But the number of people who are creative, actively creative, even personally, in their own personal development, in the United States, for example, is declining. We are a declining, self-doomed nation because we are anti-creative. Look at what we've done to our people. Look at the number of people who have worthless jobs. Look at the number of people who are employed or receive their income in speculation, financial speculation. They are producing nothing. They're negative in their effect on creativity. They are dooming society by their very increase of their very numbers. You know? The British Empire, the British monarchy is not helping this process any bit. So therefore, the problem is that there's a reduction, an accelerated reduction, since the assassination of Kennedy in particular, and also since actually the rate of creativity under Franklin Roosevelt in our war mobilization, for example, was higher. And Kennedy was simply going back to that kind of rate of creativity that we saw during the war, in the mobilization for the war. So now we've come to a point where this the shrinking of the number of people who are actually in a sense of anti-entropy, creative, is collapsing. Is collapsing as a matter of government policy. The case of the Obama administration has been the greatest factor of loss of creativity, a reversal of creativity in all U.S. history to date. This has been the worst administration from a human standpoint of anything we've ever had before. This is already killing the United States. We have the shortage of food. This spring and summer, unless there are fundamental changes made, we're going to have actual mass death rates inside the United States, as increases of death rates caused by the Obama policy of cutting back on creativity. The killing of this space program is threatening human life. So the other problem is the lack of a rise in creativity per capita in the population and in the effective overall rate of creativity. In other words, you take the curve, these things, and we say we have to take this Cenozoic rate. We have to accelerate that. And the way we can accelerate, the only way we can accelerate it, is by increasing the ratio and quality of creativity induced in the education and development of our people. What we have now in the Green program is actually the doom of humanity. And anyone who's a greenie essentially is implicitly a war criminal, or the same thing. They're killing humanity by destroying the thing that humanity depends upon, which is not only an increase in the number of people who are creative, as opposed to people who follow routines or do useless things like Wall Street, but we're also failing to increase and advance the quality of creativity which these people are capable of doing. So our educational system is actually a mass murderous system, because what is being done to education is diminishing so much the ability to generate creativity that net loss would already doom us, although at a slower rate than Obama would do it. And that's what's in process. So therefore, we have to understand we can no longer tolerate the oligarchical system under which the great mass of the human population is left ignorant of these kinds of qualities of discovery which are needed for humanity. And we are, in a sense, comparable to the dinosaurs. in the way our public policy is followed. By leveling off and reducing the rate of productivity in our population on this planet, or large parts of the planet, especially the transatlantic region, we are actually condemning the human species insofar as it accepts this policy to extinction. So we're at an extinction point, which is coming up at us fast, as long as this green policy is maintained. Now, what was demonstrated by the work was done here a couple of weeks ago and last week is the same point, that there's a certain quality of creativity, which is clearly definable, and it's the rate of the increase of that, just like you see on this picture, on this chart. There must be a hyperbolic acceleration of the effective creativity of the system on which the continued existence of the human species depends. And if we fail to honor that obligation, then we can celebrate this President of the United States as being the man who extinguished the human species or contributed the most to doing it. It's already clear, actually, say in Massachusetts, for example, around MIT, the Route 128. Around there, you had the finance or science industry there, and that was a key part, a signal part, as well as California and the West Coast, a signal part of our growth rate, technological growth rate. But at that time, by 1968, we were already contracting, and so our productivity, our national economic productivity, and we have been going down at an accelerating rate ever since that time. So we are now moving toward one of your extinction points. We are the dinosaurs of the universe right now.
Yeah.
What you're saying, therefore, is we're saying there's a certain class of people called the international financier interest, which has been controlling this planet with organized crime, such as gambling. Gambling should be outlawed, or it's not outlawed. You can't collect on it. If you lost, you don't have to pay anything because it was the guy who did it to you was a criminal. Therefore, he doesn't get any money out of this deal. So eliminate this kind of destruction, this kind of corruption, immoral corruption. It's intrinsically immoral. It's destructive of mankind and can put mankind, as we see now, into a threat of an extinction process. And we've got to eliminate that. The problem out there is most people, the problem with the typical American is they're cowards. Why are they cowards? Because we are still at war. We're still sending our troops out there to get slaughtered. When they send them out one time, if they come back, you send them out again and get them re-slaughtered. And we are destroying the ability of the United States to organize its own development and defense. The same thing has happened in Europe. So we are destroying humanity under these conditions when we know that the policies exist as possibilities for solving. But the problem is, since the killing of Jack Kennedy, which was a deliberate operation, not by some lunatic, this was an internationally calculated elimination. Jack was John F. Kennedy was in the process of a development program, which would have changed the planet for the better. But these guys wanted to go to war, a war in India, in Southeast Asia. They wanted to go to the war. Kennedy blocked it. General Eisenhower was blocking it, in a sense, supporting the blocking. Leader was another great leader, the same thing. So by killing Kennedy, they made it possible to go ahead with this long war, a 10-year-long war in Indochina. The United States has never recovered from the chain reaction consequences of that 10 years of war. We have destroyed the morality of our people. We have led to presidents who were either not fit to be president or were unable to be president because they didn't have the means or guts to buck Wall Street and London. So this Wall Street-London syndrome is something which is still the problem because Wall Street and London are the reason that we're robbing our citizens and bailing this out and bailing that out and so forth. We are about to go totally bankrupt, belly up. And they keep trying to do it. They say we've got to save the economy. We've got to protect the banks. Well, I know how to do these things. It's my specialty, and I'm more competent than any of these guys. None of this should be done, and it doesn't need to do it. There's no reason to do it. These guys are going to go bankrupt, these bankers, these filthy bankers, the speculators. So what? They lost. They lost. If it's a gambling debt, forget it, buddy. No payoff by the U.S. government for gambling debts. The U.S. government, we can create a system. We can reverse this thing beginning now. The problem is we haven't got anything like a candidate in sight who has the brains and guts to know what to do, and it's fairly simple is what has to be done in terms of principle. We have to go back and being what we are, what we were, and do it all over again. Therefore, they're fighting to maintain the continuity of the empire. They don't give a damn about Obama. He's just a puppet they use temporarily. And they're saying is they're trying to maintain the tradition of empire, which we've known of, since the siege of Troy, essentially, is that sort of thing. And this imperial problem is the problem. If we eliminate that and get rid of these politicians who are useless and get some courage back to a lot of our citizens who've lost their guts and won't fight, members of Congress who won't fight against this thing. And that's the issue here. And we have to learn the lesson from this process that we do understand, and we are coming to better understand what the role of mankind in the universe is supposed to be. When we start looking at the solar system as a whole and look into the galaxy and beyond that, we begin to see very clearly where we must go. We see this curvature, this function, which is a simple demonstration of that point. And we can just get enough people to realize that this is what must be done. And it will be a minority of people who will lead that zone, but sometimes a minority can ignite a majority. And since we know the American people don't like this, the effects they're getting, if we can get a few to raise the voice and set a trend going to change it, we may have a chance, even this year, to save the civilization.
Sounds like a call to arms.
What else would you do at a time like this? There's a time to go to war, and someone has to sound the bugle.
All right, anything else?
If the trumpet shall sound an uncertain note, who then shall heed the call to battle? Good old biblical slogan.